Flat leaves might be something along this line. So other term we might use sometimes is ribbon-like leaves, so like a piece of ribbon. You know, usually they're thin and flat. We flip over page 5. We've got a few more terms here. We're almost done with this part. Serrated, the first one. So the edge of the leaf margin has basically looks like saw teeth. Some of these are really easily visible with the naked eye, but others, and I do have a couple hand lenses if you are so inclined. We do have one here. I think you'll identify it anyway before you even have to look at that feature, but some of these leaves you have to look really closely at, or look up to the light or with a magnifying glass, and you'll see the edges of the leaves are not smooth. They actually have saw teeth all the way around. Undulating, I don't have that. That's a characteristic that's common with a plant called Potamogeton crispus. It's a non-native, it's an invasive plant, but it really comes up in the springtime, April and May, and then it does its reproductive cycle and dies back for the year like it was never there. We probably won't see it again until the fall. So undulating, basically what's describing is the edge of the leaf margin looks like lasagna noodles. It's really the best description for it. A mid-vein, very common with aquatic plants. Here's a big one, like where everyone can see from the distance. Obviously, if I hold this up, we don't even need light behind it. We can see clearly that big mid-vein right down the middle. Some of the smaller plants, when it asks you the question, does it have a mid-vein, a smaller leaf, you know, you might have to look up to the light a little bit. But I mean, you'll find that there is a mid-vein that's pretty apparent. Let's see. Oh, leaf lobes. So, two kind of leaf lobes. Just like earlobes here, these are these flaps hanging down from the bottom of these plants. These are two different species here. I lumped a few into the same bin. This one here is what we'd call sharp lobes. See the point that it comes to at the bottom? And then this is would be rounded lobes. See, it doesn't have that real point. The dead giveaway on these two would be the color of the flowers if they were there, but you'll see that inside the book, but I didn't want to make it all that easy. Stem attached at one end versus stem attached at the center. I'll go back to this bin. Again, 3 different species in this one. Can you see this from back there? The stem is attached in the center of this plant. If I were to trace around and around and around that leaf edge, I would never actually get to the stem, right? Because it's attached in the center. Versus I take a plant like this, you've got this natural split in the leaf. If I were to trace around the margin of this leaf, eventually I would end up back at the stem, right? Some more way to remember the difference. Let's see, the last line of stuff, bladders. There is one here. It's actually not the best example. It's a healthy plant, but the lake that I grabbed that from this morning, the bladders, you'll see them, but they're not really apparent like they are a lot of times. A lot of times they're unmistakable. It just looks like someone took thousands of BBs, green or black or brown, and just threw them into a plant. There's just thousands and thousands of them stuck everywhere. That's a genus called Utricularia. It's a carnivorous plant, so those actually open up, and they do feed on small organisms in the water. A ligule, the next one, don't worry about that for today. That just describes the way a leaf wraps around the stalk, kind of like corn does, or anyone familiar with that with Phragmites? Common reed, that stuff you see in drainage ditches takes over wetlands. So a ligule, that's how that leaf wraps around the stalk. And then last, broad, lance-shaped, or narrow. This is what we call a broad leaf versus a lance shape, so like the end of a sword, nice pointy one, versus say a narrow leaf. Okay. And then at the end there's some different words, and even in today as we talk, you'll hear me say non-native plants, or invasive, or non-indigenous, or exotic, or nuisance. There's tons of terms. Moral of the story, anything in that green book and plants that you'll identify in here as non-native plants, those are all considered invasive species, okay? Like, they will become a problem. They do not belong here in New England, and they will cause a mess in the lake or pond. That's not to say, though, that a native plant can't become nuisance. So this room represented our lake, white lily pads, for example, a native plant. If we had a little patch of it in the corner there, I think hopefully we'd all agree that's probably good for the lake. It's habitat, it's providing some shade for fish, that sort of thing. But if this entire room, if we couldn't see 1 square foot of water, it was just covered in lily pads, even though it's a native plant, it has grown to the nuisance level at that point, an invasive level. It's shading out anything else, becoming a monoculture, basically wiping out any other plants in the lake. It's not good for habitats. Even though it's a native plant, we can still call it invasive. Make sense? But these non-natives all will become a problem. All right. I'm going to show you how this book's set up. We're going to use these charts on the back instead of starting at the beginning like a typical dichotomous key. We're going to use these charts, and these we found people really seem to pick up a lot faster, and I think hopefully you'll agree. If you don't like to do it this way, I can show you the other way to do it starting at the beginning of the book. So if you go to the back of this book, as you will see, just like I mentioned at the beginning how important it is to know if the plant is submerged, emergent, or floating leaf, that's because of the way this is all set up. You see that first chart in the back? The very top, quick reference guide, submerged plants. We open that up to the next page, you get the last 2 charts. You've got the reference chart for floating leaf plants, and then the last one, the reference chart for emergent plants. So if we don't start on that right chart, we will never we'll never be able to identify these plants. That's why it's so important. Let's start with this here. I'll do a little group example. So again, this is sitting in a bucket. You don't know, but I think we all probably have an idea of what this is. So does everyone agree this was a floating leaf plant? All right. So let's start. We have to start on the chart that's for floating leaf plants. So here we are. Where do you think we start? Start here. All right. Easy. You can have 2 choices. This is where all those questions and terms come in, okay? First set of questions we have, floating and submerged leaves look alike or no leaves present, or the floating and submerged leaves differ. Does that look like it has any leaves under the water? No. So there are no submerged leaves present. That's the box on the left. Next 2 questions, rooted to the bottom or not rooted to the bottom? What do you think? Rooted? Yep. Ribbon-like or non-ribbon? Non. Broadleaf or lance-shaped? Broad. Next 2. Stem attached at the middle or one end? Correct. Sharp lobes or round lobes? Yes, correct. So, what is that? Let's see. Round lobes. This gave us 3 choices. Yellow water lily and a couple of others. When that happens in this chart, pick any one of them. We'll pick the top one, yellow water lily. What does that mean? What do we just accomplish? Pretty much nothing at this point. So, back to you gotta go to the very beginning of the book. Once again, page 1, on the top left, you see in bold, submerged plants. And if I open that up, page 2, we've got the floating leaf plants. That's where we started. So that's where we need to look. We have this book once again set up for volunteer folks that might not know all these Latin terms and whatnot. These are set up in alphabetical order by the common name of the plant. So the name you came up with in that chart in the back's the common name. We had yellow water lily, right? For Y.